Please, everybody stand up.
So, my name is Cheung. I go by White Code Craves on Twitter, and the same thing for my homepage. I'm a developer at Github. I work on the enterprise product, which is basically the same thing as github.com, but you get it in a VM, and you can collaborate on software within your organization. The title of my talk is obviously kind of ambiguous, and since there's no descriptions, I kind of wanted to go over an overview of what I want to talk about. The bulk of what I want to talk about is how to make software projects run smoothly. There's obviously a lot of moving pieces that glue together, and as human beings, we're not really good at reading each other's minds. The process always involves things like planning and discussions, doing prototypes, and then iterating on those prototypes, and then finally shipping a product at some point, or shipping client code. So assuming you have good talent to actually do the development and the design, the thing that actually gets in your way during every step of the process is communication. The more people you have, the more moving parts you have, the more communication you're going to need. But as a developer, it's very frustrating to spend all your time in a ticket tracker and to kind of basically be in a meeting all the time instead of kind of getting in the zone and focusing on real development. So obviously we need to have a good balance between having a process that eats up too much time and not having enough process to the point that everyone's duplicating work or just not doing, not implementing the right things. And because we're all programmers, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, it's a bug tracking system. I can build one myself. And it might look something like this, right? So everything on this screen is something we care about when we develop software. There's summaries, priorities, components, milestones, statuses. Everyone loves statuses. And everything can kind of be customized and assigned according to rules. And I call this entire screen structured communication. And I characterize it by systems that have really high cognitive overhead. So you see a lot of form fields. It tries to be very definitive, but it's very easy to get out of sync. So there's just so much data to both input and represent on the screen that it's very friendly for a computer. It's very definitive, but it's not actually people friendly. It's not human friendly. So if we look back on the screen, the actual questions we want answered are pretty straightforward. I mean, all I really want to know is what's being worked on and how are things progressing. But what we actually see when we look at that screen is just a wall of noise. There's useful data in that noise, but because of the amount of manual kind of figuring out we have to do in our minds, all of it is kind of lost to us. So if that's structured communication, what can we do to kind of clean that up and get back to answering those original questions so it's useful for us as developers again? What if we could remove some of that structure, right? What if we could just focus on the communication part? The goal is to have natural communication, to kind of talk like we do in real life from person to person, right? And I really liked Gary Levitt's point earlier that when he hires developers, he really he wants to focus on finding people who are good at communicating, people who are good at writing and expressing their thought process. So again, these are kind of the points that we care about, right? We don't care about an assignee or a status field explicitly. Those are kind of just artifacts that appear in the system. And every project management system, I mean, I don't want to bash on Unfuddle unfairly, but every project management system has its pros and cons, and there's obviously trade-offs. But today, I kind of wanted to talk more about how GitHub Issues approaches answering some of these questions. So every repository, whoa, that is not very orange. Every repository on GitHub comes with issues, whether you're using it for open source or for private repos. It looks something like this. The kind of, instead of that wall of form fields, you can kind of immediately get an idea of who cares about this issue. So Donish opened this issue a day ago, and kind of what the issue is about. Then the rest of the screen is dedicated to discussion, basically. We want to focus on the conversation and the talking, and not so much the database schema behind it, I guess. And when you're writing the original issue or when you're commenting on an issue, we only give you one box, right? So your only action really is to just talk like you would, like a normal human being. And the simplicity is nice, but what if you wanted to get help with a question, or you wanted to ping somebody about something you didn't understand? So then I like to call it lighting the bat signal. And so from the text input, what you can do is you can start typing an @ symbol, and that'll bring up a context menu for everyone in your organization. And this autocomplete lets you kind of ping specific people that you feel is relevant to the conversation. Either they can answer your question, or they might be able to kind of give more input about whatever the issue is. Sometimes just one person isn't enough. So if you need to ping more than one person, you can ping an entire team. And when I say team, I don't mean an actual hierarchical thing in your organization. When I say team, I really mean categorizing people with similar skill sets or people with different experience backgrounds. So for example, you might have a team called design, and those are people who you think have the design specialization that might be able to help you with an issue. Once you are set up teams that you think are logical for your organization, then you can use the same @ syntax to autocomplete the teams that you want to ping. So for example, some of the teams we have at GitHub, we also use teams for things that aren't even related to code. So if you are developing a feature and you're worried that it might not be, the copy on the page is not conformant to your HR policy, then maybe you want to ping your HR team. So now going back to the original issue, you can see in the issue details that in this issue, 2 specific people are being pinged, and everyone who's labeled as GitHub Enterprise Sales is also being pinged, kind of at the end of the issue there. So specifically, if I wanted to know, if I knew that Donish was the last person working on this bug, then I'd ping his user handle. If I wanted to ping like a support team, then it's separated by that /. And if I wanted to get designer input, kind of to put some finishing polish on a certain page, then I can ping our designers. So at this point, we have a way of getting feedback and a way of reaching out to different people with different expertise. But the problem is this isn't actually how features are shipped, right? You can't ship features by just having a committee. You actually need one person, like a single contact person, to be in charge of a feature or a bug, right? They might not necessarily do the coding, but they should be the one that kind of keeps track of the progress of things. So looking at the top there, we actually have an assignee field and a milestone field, but typically we leave these blank. We use them from our API to kind of do batch processing if we wanted to have kind of very quick temporary labels. But typically, the person who files the issue is the person that's in charge of seeing it through. Sometimes issues will be open-ended discussions, and if there's no clear person in charge, eventually when it's actually ready to have something done to it, then somebody will come in and they'll say, "I'll perp it," which means being the primary responsibility person. This isn't actually stored anywhere. This is kind of just a convention we use so that you can keep the discussion very natural. People talk as they would, and if someone's interested in the problem, they're the person who kind of takes charge. So kind of going over some of the last few slides, compared to structured communication, I think freeform is much better because you have much lower cognitive overhead, right? You're really focusing on the discussion, what you want to talk about, what you want to fix and make, rather than kind of filling out a form for reporting, right? We want to build software. We don't really want to make reports. And over time, the nice thing about having a discussion is a discussion can change over time, right? It can be edited, and people can kind of contribute more to the discussion, and you don't have this problem where you feel like you're just updating columns in a database record. That's kind of, I think, the most important core of what issues accomplish, but there's a few more features that I really like kind of as added bonuses. So for one thing, you can also use issues to kind of do more coordination. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but maybe kind of use it more like a CMS or a wiki, because you can do formatting, you can do syntax highlighting with it. So in any of the input fields, you can type in Markdown, and if you switch it over into the preview tab, you can see we do the formatting. And a really neat little thing is if you use triple backticks and then the name of the language, we'll syntax highlight that code based on the language you chose. And if we're trying to focus on making things more human for people when we develop software, text inherently isn't very good at conveying emotion, right? You lose all the tone and all the body language cues compared to actually being in an office and talking to people. So to fix that, you can use a thing called emojis. And emojis are amazing. So emojis are these little icons that are very cutesy, and they kind of add some emotion and fun back into just flat text. They look something like this. And I think, you know, regardless of what language anyone speaks, when you see that hand gesture, you know that means rock out, that means metal. And we use this all over the place to kind of express a lot of things. It's almost both a way to make it more fun, but also express something more clearly. If we wanted to vote on whether something should be implemented or fixed in a certain way, you could use the thumbs up or the thumbs down. If something's ready to be shipped, I don't know where it started that like the squirrel somehow means you're shipping something, but if you say ship it, you get a squirrel in a hat. If things are not going well, you have a very friendly poop face. And for all the Doom fans out there, there's a lot of like different stages of how frustrated you feel. He just gets bloodier and bloodier. I think this is the worst one you can get. There's emojis for basically everything. And if you forget any of them, that same context menu you can use to ping people, you can do with emojis. So the shortcut to get this menu to come up is if you start typing colon, and it'll autocomplete all the emojis available. Kind of as a sidebar, I think as developers, we like it when things are very keyboard friendly and very fast. So within issues, you can kind of like go through a lot of things very quickly with keyboard shortcuts. And you can bring up this menu on any page by clicking the question mark or typing a question mark. Now I want to switch gears a bit, talk about notifications. I think notifications are a really hard UX problem. And they only work when you follow kind of two broad rules. You have to push notifications only to relevant people. And when people get notifications, they should always be able to unsubscribe if they don't care about that particular notification. If people can't unsubscribe, then suddenly they just stop caring, right? They'll see the notification, they'll automatically like archive it, they'll just ignore them completely. So we do two forms of notifications. The first is web, and you can see the notifications for a project by clicking the blue button on the top there. And this is kind of how I start out my mornings, is to kind of just skim the issues that are available and see what needs work and what's in progress. This little icon means there's a pull request, and I'll go over this a bit more later, but basically it means there's code attached to this issue. It can either be reviewed or it could be merged back into master. I can kind of look over the other issues and see if I can either add some feedback or add some more context to get them actually started. And hello? Whoa. And most importantly, the button on the right here lets you kind of opt out of any messages that you don't care about. So if I know I can't help with a problem, I don't want it to keep bugging me. You can also get notifications via email, and basically everything that happens on the web, you can also accomplish via email. So you can reply to any notification, and it would show up on the web view as well. And I think the complaint I hear most frequently with issues is that it's too simple, and it's intentionally simple, so it's very user-friendly. But if you do need kind of more filtering or more advanced features, the nice thing is anything you can do on the web, anything you can do via email is all exposed via REST API. So if you wanted to notify someone in a separate process or in a webhook, you can use this API to add comments, list things, edit things, or label them. So this is kind of like the computer-friendly version of ticket tracking. If you're using Ruby, then this is the client library you can use to access the API. So if issues are where discussions start, then branches are where the code lives, right? So I like to think of pull requests as the start of a discussion in an issue, and then when work is actually done, you make a branch and then you submit a pull request. And one of my favorite shortcuts is if you install the hub gem or the hub standalone library, then from the command line you can actually say git pull request this branch that I'm working on for this issue number. Once you have a pull request, you're able to do code review with inline forms. So if you just click on the line that you want to discuss, you get that same input box. Once a branch is reviewed and tested, then we want it to actually go out to production. And our definition of production is just master. So as soon as you merge it into master, it's going to go out to production. And I kind of found this out, like when I started working there, no one told me this. And when I made my first branch and I had everything ready, I merged it to master, and it just suddenly started saying, oh, deploying to production. I was like, no, 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 don't break the whole site. And luckily it didn't, I hope. Another nice thing is from the pull request, which is basically a glorified issue, you can see the build status. And we use Jenki for our CI system, but there's a build status API. So if you want to use like a third-party system or have your own custom system, you can just use that API to access the build status. Once things are ready to go out, the button will actually turn green, telling you it's clean to merge and that the tests are green. And if you hit that button, again, it starts deploying to production, right? And there's different hooks you can set up to basically either ping you in your chat room or ping you in your email. Actually, by default, it pings you in your email. As far as production goes, we have kind of a modified version of Git flow where we don't have an intermediate staging branch. We allow you to basically deploy any project in any branch to any environment. So you can deploy it to a staging environment or to a production environment. Again, all branches are deployable. So wrapping up a bit, even though we all love the details of coding, we all love doing the development, what makes a product successful is how well you communicate with your team while you're building your product. So I think regardless of, independent of which system you actually decide to use, it's really important to kind of go over and audit your communication and make sure that it's smooth and streamlined and it's good for people rather than computers. And that's my talk. Thanks. And also, another reminder, I know we keep bugging you guys to come out for free drinks, but there's going to be a Ruby Underground drinking thing at 6 and also a drink up at 10.
Thanks. And
Cool.
If anyone has any questions, we'd love to get some answers here. So
that is an open issue, and it's come up a lot of times. It's being worked on kind of as a spike internally. I don't know when that's coming out. Yeah. And as far as doing images, I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but in Markdown, you can actually link to an image, and that's kind of how people fix it right now.